Watching PM Agenda, as we've been discussing, much is at stake for all political parties in Saturday's West Australian Senate election. That includes the Greens, who are hoping that their Senator, Scott Ludlam, will hold on to his seat. There is no certainty around this. Joining me now, the Deputy Greens leader, Adam Bandt from Melbourne. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. The Greens did have a poor performance in the Tasmanian state election. How important is Saturday's election for the party?
Well, that same weekend of the Tasmanian state election, our vote also went up in South Australia, and we took a lot of heart from that. There is a lot at stake in this coming election, and it's not just for the Greens, it's for Australia's contribution on global warming. It's about protection of the environment. Really, what's at stake is whether we wake up on Sunday to find that Tony Abbott has total control of the Parliament with him and his allies, or whether there's a strong Senate with Greens in it who are able to stand up to him on the things that matter and stand up for protections on global warming, for example.
Well, if it is that important for the country and for the planet, if you fail then to hold that Senate seat, what happens then? Will you look internally at what's gone wrong, why you haven't been able to convince West Australians of that argument?
Well, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I was on the phones last night from here in Melbourne with a room full of volunteers ringing people in WA to talk about their concerns, and what we were hearing is that their concerns are very much our concerns as well, making sure that Tony Abbott and his destructive agenda isn't able to be implemented, whether it's health, whether it's the environment, whether it's with refugees. And you know, over 800,000 views for Scott Ludlam's speech in the Senate, and that's nudging Julia Gillard's misogyny speech. I think the word is getting out there about what the Greens stand for. And the other piece of feedback that I've been getting is that people know that Scott Ludlam is a homegrown West Australian Green senators, which stands in stark contrast to a lot of the other micro parties and unknowns who are standing on Saturday.
Well, speaking of the minor parties, the Prime Minister's been quite critical of the Palmer United Party, the amount of money it's spending. He suggested that Clive Palmer is trying to buy seats in Parliament. Do you share that view, and can you tell me how much of the Greens spending?
Look, I am worried about the growing trend in Australia that says that if you're in private business and then you don't like the judgment that is being handed down either from Parliament or the courts, you get enough money together to run and get a seat in Parliament, and then you use that to hopefully promote your cause. I think it would be pretty worrying if that's what Australia becomes. And you know, when you look at the United States and you look at their electoral system, I think most people in this country would think we don't want to go there. But that's unfortunately, I think, the way that it's going. What the Greens would like to see is let's stop the private donations to politics altogether and move towards, as they have in other countries, the system of public funding of elections, and that way you remove all these perverse incentives. As to what the Greens are spending, I don't know, but I do know we've been doing a lot of the Obama-style fundraising, a lot of small donations that are coming in for Scott. There's one of the best decisions that one of our staff ever made was to put a donate button on Scott Ludlam's YouTube speech, and I've got to say there's been a lot of money that's been rolling in from that.
Let me turn to the issues of the day then. Job losses announced at Philip Morris. They're going to end cigarette making in Melbourne, and the BP refinery in Brisbane. Are the Greens shedding tears over either of these announcements?
Well, and the front page of the Age here today as well was that the Prime Minister Abbott's proposed jobs and economic plan for Victoria that was due to see some announcements being made in March is still nowhere to be seen, and the fund that he was meant to get together for retrenched auto workers is also hasn't yet been pulled together. I mean, it's astounding that Tony Abbott's got two reports sitting on his desk. One is the Secret Commission of Audit report that apparently he's been going through today in Perth, and we see selectively leaked stories about that in the media all the time. And the other, the economic plan for Victoria, is nowhere to be seen. And so our
sure, but getting back to this question about today's announcements from BP and Philip Morris, are you sorry to see them go?
That the Greens have been crystal clear that we want to see fewer people smoking, and that as a consequence means less profit made out of people dying, and ultimately those industries being replaced by new ones. So if that
you're happy with that outcome?
Happening, well, if the transition is happening because people are living healthier lifestyles, then we are all the better for it, and the public purse is better for it. And of course, it's very distressing when people who aren't responsible for the corporate decisions of Philip Morris lose their jobs. But I think that tobacco companies shrinking is an inevitable consequence of people deciding to live healthier lifestyles. With respect to the others, look, there's a bigger question about the future of manufacturing in the southeastern states in particular. Here in Victoria, we've seen our gross state product per capita start going backwards, and there's no plan for jobs given the pressures that are being faced by, for example, competing against countries in Asia where we're never going to be able to win on wages. And we're very distressed that there isn't a plan to support manufacturing in the transition or to boost advanced manufacturing.
Hang on, what about the role of the carbon tax, which the Greens would like to take even higher? It may not be the main reason, but it certainly is a contributing factor in putting pressure on these manufacturers.
Well, the price on pollution did two things. It said to the country's biggest polluters, you can't keep doing this for free, you have to pay towards some of the cost of your pollution. And then it took that money and said, that's available now to be invested in household compensation, and it's also available to invest in the industries of the future. There will be jobs in manufacturing and in broader sections of industry in a clean energy economy, and that's been the experience in Germany, for example.
Yes, you would hope that's the case, but aren't these just crocodile tears about the dirty industries that are shutting down?
Well, there's always going to be transition, and we've been very clear about that. But I mean, let's just mention Germany. They've got 400,000 jobs in renewable energy. You put that in the Australian context, that's 100,000 jobs, and that dwarfs the number of jobs that you find in oil mining, oil and coal mining, for example. I mean, the putting solar panels on people's roofs and making those solar panels here is a very jobs-rich industry, and the government needs to get out of the way and allow Australia to make that transition so that we can have long-term sustainable jobs, not the unsustainable jobs that we've got at the moment.
But just on BP specifically, they are now going to take refined fuel from Singapore, most likely, and it then would be shipped here to Australia. So does this really benefit the environment, the atmosphere at all in this change?
Well, I think the lesson that I draw from what's happening is that Australia is not going to be able to compete with countries in our region on wages. They are always going to be able to undercut us on wages, and especially when you're dealing with countries that might have questionable records when it comes to democracy. And so the question we need to be asking is, how do we set Australia up so that we're not in a race to the bottom on wages, but instead we're competing and have something to sell the rest of the world in 15 years' time that's not fossil fuels.
Adam Bandt, Deputy Greens Leader, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.